Hello. This week, the exotic. It's not the Holy Grail, don't worry. It's close. It's close. There was a fascination, there's always been a fascination with mounting exotic materials in silver for the wealthiest of clients and collectors. You get things in Europe called Kunstkammer or Wunderkammer, where all sorts of natural materials are mounted, sections of narwhal, coral, rare eggs. Ostrich eggs were big in the Elizabethan period. If you could get one, they were possibly more valuable than gold by the time you'd actually transported them back in one piece, and sort of coconut cups and what have you. Towards the end of the 18th century, particularly in England, the fascination and the fashion were for either coconut cups, where the bowl was formed as a coconut shell, or more rarely ostrich eggs. Coconuts were more abundant. The method with which these things came back into the country, I don't think it was any serious commercial enterprise. These were goods that were gathered by sailors on ship when they called into ports all around the different parts of the globe that they were sailing and coming back to England. They would acquire items that there were very inexpensive. You can imagine coming to this country and wanting to buy a hen's egg. People would look at you slightly bizarrely. But of course, if it's a big egg like this and it's already been cut open, often the tops would have been cut off or sawn off. Who wants a discarded shell? So they were very cheap to buy in the ports and bring back as a little bit of private cargo, if you like, and then sell once they're back in England to various traders or goldsmiths that wanted to use them and mount them as rarities. And at that point, they had become very expensive, very valuable items. In this case, of course, you can only get the ostrich eggs in Africa, so that limited supply, and you had to go halfway around the world. The coconuts grow all over the place, and so you will often see more coconuts than you will see the rarer ostrich egg cups. Sometimes they come individually, sometimes they come in pairs. Sometimes the smaller coconuts or broken sections of coconut are used on things like cream jugs and salt cellars, anything where they can partially form a bowl and be mounted up. You get the little coquille nuts, which are smaller, and they're used as the bowls of punch ladles or toddy ladles. But there's this huge fascination with the growth of empire and, Britain ruling the waves, of having these unusual objects, these curiosities brought back. And you can see that no expense has been spared in the mounting of these objects, usually undertaken by a handful of specialist goldsmiths. There are provincial examples of all these things, of course. This one is by the firm of Thomas Phipps and Edward Robinson. And you will see earlier examples than this by the previous generation, James Phipps. You'll often only get a maker's mark on the mount. There would be really no way, once these delicate mounts are fitted, of having them assayed safely. You could submit the mount to be assayed, of course, but importantly, the silver content, the value of the silver content in these objects is subservient to the value of the egg. The egg would have been many, many times more valuable than any bowl in silver at the time that you could make of it. On occasion, often with ostrich egg cups, I must say, normally they will have a silver foot. And that foot, because it is a larger section of metal, that will be separately submitted for assay, hallmarked, and then fitted to the shell. So you will find them, coconut and ostrich egg cups, with full marks to the base, but often the lips here, the lips or rims, the mounts, will only have a single maker's mark, maybe once, maybe struck twice. This is fascinating because it's unusual to have a turned wooden foot. And I think because this is a species of ebony, it was deliberately done aesthetically to have the contrast of the exotic black wood and the extremely rare white shell. But it's got more of a story than that. When I purchased this, and I purchased it reasonably because it has got a whacking great crack or two running down it. Don't they all? It is an eggshell, for goodness sake, and it's travelled half the globe. When I bought it, I was also given by the auctioneer a fistful of paper, which came with it. We'll push that out of sight for the moment. And this is fascinating because it is a snapshot of this object's history through the years, if you like. We have the original maker's mark, Phipps and Robinson here. We have a crest, which I was able to research despite it already being in these papers and confirm. We have a crest here, baronial crest. It is two eagles' heads bearing rings issuing out of a baronet's coronet. And interestingly, and really helpfully, we also have a set of initials in script, period with the crest. You'll often notice when you get period crests and initials, the crest is here, the initials are here, they line up. It's on one side of the piece and then on the other. Often when you get additional family initials on objects, say the next generation or the generation after that, and they still leave the crest on, they may put their initials in a slightly different place that doesn't correspond directly to the crest. Maybe underneath it, it may be at the side at 90 degrees. So beware of that. But from the style of that engraving and its positioning, I can tell you that that was done at the same time as that. So that gives us the possibility of tracing the individual in a family that it was made for, which we were able to do. But here, and I should say this is made in around 1785, 1790 in London. Here we have the receipt for it on the 10th of October 1959. And it's to a Mrs. Hartus, and it is from G. Austin and Sons Limited, complete house furnishers, removals and warehousing, Barnyards Road, Peckham, London. And the description, it's like something out of Del Boy, Trotter's Independent Traders, is ostrich egg, not ostrich egg cup, but ostrich egg, £2, 10 shillings. So whenever this started life, and we will get to that and who originally owned it, it popped up in 1959, and Mrs. Hartus bought it, full of expectation, no doubt, because also accompanying it is this clipping out of a newspaper, which shows the much earlier Elizabethan ostrich egg mounted cup with a silver foot and strap work. And this is for the same year, 1959, and that sold, I believe it was at Sotheby's, let me check. No, at Christie's, for £4,400. So Mrs. Hartus must have thought she'd won the lottery. So she didn't hang about. Having seen that, she contacted only 2 days later the Victoria and Albert Museum. And what's fabulous is we've got their reply on the headed note paper from the very famous director of metalwork, keeper of metalwork, Charles Oman, who's written many books. Many of you will have books by Charles Oman on your bookshelves. And I've got his signature there, and I would have paid money just to have that, believe me. But I'll read it to you. Dear Madam, very brusque, Dear Madam, the silversmith mark on your ostrich egg cup would appear to be that used by Thomas Phipps and Edward Robinson, correct? In about 1810, incorrect. It's about 15, 20 years earlier. Never mind. Your sketch of the ornament, and by ornament he means the crest and initials, is in accordance with this. which is about right. It is of that period, but it is about 1790. I can make no suggestion with regard to the crest, which does not appear to be one used by the Arundel family. Unfortunately, that was the second mistake that Charles Oman made. It is, in fact, the crest of the Arundel family. Mrs. Hartus kept on digging. There's a small note, I think, to a genealogical association, and she's written down the reply, which it is the crest of Arundel. And I think there might have been some confusion over Arundel with Oman. He might have thought he was talking about the Earls of Arundel, which is certainly it's not their crest, but it is in fact the crest of the Arundel family of Castle Wardour in Wiltshire. And what's really exciting is we know that the 8th Baroness at the time, in the 1790s, 1800s, when this was made, had the initials MCA, Mary Christina Arundel. So this cup was actually originally the property of the 8th Baroness. And this is the sort of wealth that you had to have to own one of these cups. In the 18th century, this ostrich egg was, as I say, it was worth its weight in gold almost. Extremely expensive, extremely fashionable object. Imagine the looks on the faces of your guests when you brought out not a magnificent silver goblet to drink out of, but this, an egg the size of which they had never seen before. It is all theatre, it is display, it is entertaining people, but it is also wonderful. So we know actually that Mary Christina's husband, the 8th Baron, was a spendthrift, and he died and left enormous debts, at which point I imagine this cup, maybe a pair of them, maybe even a set, were sold. They vanished into the ether then for 150 years until in a clearance house in Peckham in 1959, the eagle-eyed Mrs. Hartus spied it and thought that her £2 10 shillings, which was a considerable sum of money in 1959, not a fortune, but a considerable sum of money, it was, I think, more than a week's wages, would be well deployed in the purchase of this goblet, having seen something she felt was vaguely similar selling at Christie's for nearly £4,500. She was to be disappointed. She was to be called Madam by Charles Oman, Keeper of Metalwork at the Victoria and Albert Museum. That must have come as a blow. But she did get to the bottom of it, almost. She didn't know the correct date of it, but she found the family, she'd found who it was made for. And then this appeared at auction a few years ago. And I must say, because of the damage, because of the cracks to the shell, which don't bother me in the slightest, and also the wooden stem had cracked at some point, I would imagine very early on, because it has not been repaired by glue, but it has been wrapped extremely tightly in hundreds of twists of metal wire. So it's been braced, if you like, and put together. But this is typical of the sort of exotic item that came over in the Georgian period. And when we look at these today, we are sometimes want to think they are not remarkable. But imagine the only way when this was made you could acquire this object was from someone who had sailed sailed all the way to South Africa and back, months and months, a journey of months and months, and picked it up and managed to bring it back intact. And then it was mounted up by a very good London silversmith and presented to you or purchased for you. So that's a fascinating insight, I think, not only into the exotic objects, but also the ephemera that comes with them. Those papers are worth as much to me with this object as the object itself. It is all part of its history. That's a small thing for this week. I didn't really have anything else to talk about, so I plucked this off a shelf. I hope you've enjoyed seeing it. And next week, hopefully, another discovery or something will turn up. But until then, goodbye and good antiques hunting.